Hello and welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So the NTIA released the Notice of Funding Opportunity for the Broadband Equity Access Deployment Program. That came out on Friday. I did a little summary on that. Today I want to dive into two of the first steps that states are going to need to be looking at as they look to put in their application. Be right back. Thanks for joining me. Rick Uzzi here from Zcorum with Broadband Deployment News. So as I mentioned, the NOFO's out for the BEAD program. There's a lot in that document. I summarized some of it on Friday as I went through that on the broadcast last day of the week. And today I wanted to dive in, like I say, on these two first steps. So this is part of the NOFO here. So it talks about the program sequencing, and then you've got, it talks about the different order of things. So you've got the letter of intent. That's the very first step. That can be done now. Then you've got request. Where'd my mouse go? There it is. Got your request for initial planning funds. That can be done in conjunction with the letter of intent a little bit later. I'll talk about that in a moment. Then you've got a 5-year action plan, program funded allocation of notice available amounts. That happens after the FCC broadband maps are completed and possibly after the challenge process is done, I would think. Well, an initial challenge process about the maps, let's say. Then there'll be an initial proposal. The initial proposal would come from the state, and then a challenge process based on that. Then subgrantee selection process, that would be the states deciding who the subgrantees are that would then take that money and build the broadband infrastructure. 20% funding release to get started, and then the final proposal and release of the remaining funds. So that's kind of your 9 steps. So these very first 2 steps right here are things that can start happening pretty quickly. So I wanted to cover those. So we here first see the letter of intent. There's not a lot of requirements for the letter of intent if you are not going to be requesting your initial planning funds with that letter of intent. So you can see that is due on July 18th, 11:59 p.m. Anything after that is late, and they are probably not going to be, as they say here, maybe except in extraordinary circumstances, they are not going to be granting any waivers of that delay. So you want to make sure if you want to do this at all, and I'm sure every state will get in their letter of intent. So you need to make sure you get that in by July 18th, 2022. It says here, the letter of intent, form and content, the eligible entity, or that would be a state, or any of the 4 territories, for example, Virgin Islands, Mariana Islands, Guam, and one other that I can't recall. So anyway, that's the 4 territories. They also would submit that. So that's basically your eligible entity for BEAD. They may submit only a single letter of intent. That letter of intent should be in a letter form and signed by the governor or equivalent official, for example, the mayor of District of Columbia here, since there's no governor in DC. And then whatever, I don't know what the territories as far as the highest official, but they're looking for the highest official in the government that would then submit that letter of intent or be in their name. And that basically includes a statement from that state and I'm going to use state instead of eligible entity whenever I think about it, because eligible entity is just harder to say. A statement that the state intends to participate in the program. Identification of the agency, department, or office that will serve as the recipient of and administrating agent for any BEAD program award. So basically 1 point of contact, right? Which makes sense because you want that 1 point of contact contacting or in contact with the point of contact that state has at the NTIA, and everything then communication will be very good. If the eligible entity so chooses, a request to access not more than $5 million for states or not more than 1.25 for territories for initial planning activities. And just an aside there, the amounts there, that's 5% of the initial funds that the state can get, they can use for planning, initial planning. And the territories take that and split that 4 ways. So that's the reason for those amounts there. So if they don't want to do that right away with the letter of intent, they instead can submit that at a later date. However, everything must be submitted as far as documentation for initial planning funds must be submitted by 11:59 EDT on August 15th, 2022. So in short, letter of intent must be received by July 18th. You can submit your request for initial planning funds along with that, or you have until the 15th of August in order to be able to get that in. And actually the request for initial planning funds, there's more that's involved that has to be documented in that, or certainly more that you have to more information you need to provide. So I could see some states doing that and waiting a little bit later on that. Upon receipt of the letter of intent, the NTI will provide the point of contact for each eligible entity, instructions on how to submit a request for initial planning funds. So, okay, so maybe you can't submit at the same time. So you'll submit your, I thought that you could, but I guess you could submit it early. So you submit your letter of intent, and then at that point you'll get the point of contact and eligible entity instructions on how to submit a request for initial planning funds. These instructions will provide additional information regarding what materials must be submitted, including but not limited to standard forms and a budget narrative. So again, you're going to have to supply more information. And again, the date on that, 11/59, August 15th, 2022. Eligible entities that receive initial planning funds may use those funds for the following planning and pre-deployment activities. And then it runs through these. This is what you can use those funds for. So research and data collection, including initial identification of unserved locations and underserved locations. Development, and that's all based around the broadband maps as well. Development of a preliminary budget for pre-planning. Publications, outreach, and communication support. So they want to make sure that there's a lot about outreach in this. You want to make sure that you're reaching out to the community and to various stakeholders. Providing technical assistance to potential subgrantees. So you would help them as they try to determine how to navigate these waters and how to complete their grants and what they're going to be looking for. Training for employees of the broadband program or office. Most likely the states are going to be staffing up. They need to train those folks as well as get them up to speed on everything that needs to be done for this program. And any related staffing capacity or consulting or contracted support. So training and staffing, including contractors. Establishing, operating, or increasing capacity of a broadband office. Asset mapping across the eligible entity, to catalog broadband adoption, affordability, equity, access, deployment activities. So basically, looking at the lay of the land, I think is what we're talking there, is seeing where we stand and what assets we have that we can already make use of. Conducting surveys of unserved and underserved and underrepresented communities to better understand barriers to adoption. So, I think a lot of states have already been trying to determine where their unserved and underserved areas are in the state through possibly through some surveys, but also just in getting with service providers. But I'm sure they've been surveying some consumers in certain areas. So it would include some of that. Costs associated with meeting the local coordination requirements. And there is a section in here. It's actually on page 51. I just made a note there that's on page 51. If you download this one, look for it. I'll go ahead and put a link again to this document after the video here. But I did go ahead and look at that. And here's where here's just some things you need to bear in mind. So you can apply these funds to any costs associated with meeting the local coordination requirements. And there are significant local coordination requirements in this NOFO, and who you need to be talking to about where there is broadband and who needs better broadband, and lots of different groups. They want to make sure they're hearing from everybody. So I'm going to go ahead and just go to that area. So these are the local coordination requirements. So these initial funds can help pay for activities related to this. So each eligible entity must develop a comprehensive local coordination approach that will begin in the development of the 5-year action plan and continue at each stage of the BEAD program through awarding of all subgrant funding. So you don't have to do all of this in order to request your initial funds, but you can get those initial funds to help pay for these activities. So it's probably a good idea that you understand this local coordination first. So as I said here, at each stage of the BEAD program through the awarding of all subgrant funding, local and tribal coordination and stakeholder engagement is critical to the BEAD program's success, to eliminating barriers to broadband access and adoption, and to rapidly and economically building out new broadband networks. Accordingly, each eligible entity is required to coordinate with political subdivisions, tribal governments, local and community-based organizations, and unions and worker organizations within its territory to ensure full representation and inclusion of unserved, underserved, and underrepresented communities throughout the planning and deployment process. They must document its local coordination and outreach activities by providing a detailed description of their efforts. Now, this would be in the 5-year plan, for example. This is not in the letter of intent or in the request for funds, but this is all going to be required in it. And it's 5-year action plan, initial proposal, and final proposal relative to each stage in the BEAD program process. In evaluating whether local coordination and outreach efforts meet the programmatic requirements, the Assistant Secretary will assess whether plans and activities undertaken ensure these items here: full geographic coverage, meaningful engagement and outreach to diverse stakeholder groups, utilization of multiple awareness and participation mechanisms, transparency of processes, outreach to and direct engagement of unserved and underserved communities. Eligible entities should track all engagement efforts they conduct and provide a synopsis of the needs identified and if they were addressed or not in the appropriate portions of their initial proposals, final proposals, and reporting to the NTIA. And then it goes through, again, as you'd be looking at this to assess how much all of this is going to cost you, and then you can use these initial planning funds to help pay for that. So geographic coverage, you must demonstrate, the state must demonstrate that its engagement includes sufficient geographic granularity to demonstrate full participation. Must include tribal, if relevant, rural, suburban, and urban areas to the extent applicable, and must address diverse stakeholder groups. Each political subdivision and federally recognized tribe must be given an opportunity to submit its own plan to the state for consideration in the development of the state's proposals. Likewise, each political subdivision and federally recognized tribe must be given an opportunity to comment on the proposals. The eligible entity or state must detail how it addressed each submitted plan and each relevant proposal. So you've got to make outreach to these organizations or these stakeholders. They can submit their own plan, and then you would look at that plan, evaluate it, and then you decide if you're going to use it or not, and then you need to report back to the NTIA on the results of that. It talks about the diverse stakeholder groups, must ensure that a diverse set of stakeholders is involved in development of its 5-year plan, initial proposal, final project, for example, a formal tribal consultation process, local stakeholders such as entities that carry out workforce development programs and labor unions to provide a written explanation of their approach to ensuring a reliable supply of skilled workers, listening feedback on plans for creating good-paying jobs, and to recruiting and hiring women and other historically marginalized groups. Remember, this is in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, so part of this we certainly hope will be creating lots of jobs in the country as we deploy broadband. Then they have other examples of stakeholder groups, included but not limited to, and then there's a big long list here. So, I'm just going to scroll through this. We don't need to talk about them all, but there's a big long list in here that you can look at, including, different groups here, that organizations that represent different groups. ISPs of all types. You need to be looking at the different service providers in your area. And then we've got awareness, outreach, and participation mechanisms. Successful coordination requires multiple mechanisms to ensure broadband awareness and participation. Each state must design and implement efforts that promote inclusivity. And they talk about things like listening sessions. The NTI has been doing a lot. They had listening sessions. They're doing webinars now. So trying to get as many people involved as they can. Eligible or state websites and or email addresses to submit comments directly. Information materials such as fact sheets, brochures, social media, that kind of thing. Email notifications, utilization of community anchor institutions to help promote this. Local advertisements and public service announcements. So you could run a public service announcement or even local ads, and then again you could pay for that through these initial planning funds. Transparency, they want to make sure everything's transparent in this process, nothing under the table. So eligible entities must establish, document, and adhere to clear procedures to ensure transparency. This includes publicly posting the proposals, so your initial proposal, and this is all a requirement, initial proposal, for final proposal, prior to submission to the NTIA, getting feedback on that, as well as plans or comments submitted by local political subdivisions or tribal governments, and explanations of how local recommendations were addressed. That was kind of what they were talking about there earlier. Easily navigable websites with up-to-date information, periodic reporting, and reports. Then they want underrepresented engagement. Specific engagement efforts must be targeted at underrepresented communities. Eligible entities or states must identify these communities and determine specific outreach and engagement strategies tailored to their needs, including providing outreach in the languages used, for example. So if you've got let's say a large Hispanic community, trying to provide that in Spanish to make that a little bit easier. And then again, there's some different recommendations here on ways that can be done. Each state also must document, publish, and integrate its local coordination activities with the outreach and coordination efforts it will undertake pursuant to the Digital Equity Act. So it's recommended that states, there's digital equity aspects of the BEAD program, and then there's also the Digital Equity Act that has additional funds, and it's recommended, obviously, that you take advantage of both. And if you do, they really want to see tight coordination of that so that there's no duplication of efforts and so that things are being handled as efficiently as possible. So they mention that here again. It's strongly recommended that eligible entities conduct BEAD and Digital Equity Act program local coordination efforts in tandem as one cohesive effort. So if you have two different groups looking at these things, then you should make sure that they work together closely. And then there's some other things in here. These are actually additional outside of these local coordination efforts, so I'm not going to go through that today. So again, back to the original here. So that's, again, it says, again, costs associated with meeting the local coordination requirements is which I was just talking about. And you can, in the document, you can link down here. You just click this section right here, and it will link you down to that page 51, and you can read through that. Then also some other things that you can, just to remind you where we are, some other things that you can apply these initial planning funds to. Reasonable post-NOFO pre-initial planning funds expenses in an amount not to exceed $100,000 relating to the preparation of program submissions to NTIA, such as your letter of intent. So if you're gonna, as far as your letter of intent, make sure you keep it under $100,000 in just preparing that. Again, that's not related to costs associated with meeting these local coordination requirements. I think they're just talking about processing these applications to NTIA. So let's see, relating to the preparation of submissions to NTIA, such as a letter of intent or additional capacity to state or territorial broadband offices in preparation for the BEAD program may be reimbursed. This is for reimbursement. These funds, this $100,000, may be reimbursed if they're incurred after the publication date of this NOFO, which is today, anytime after this, and prior to the date of issuance of the grant award from NTIA. So this is talking about you being able to get $100,000 between those points. Other uses approved in advance writing by the Assistant Secretary. So in other words, if there's other things that you want to see that are not mentioned here that maybe could be applied, you can get that approved in writing as long as it supports the goals of the program. In determining uses of initial planning funds, eligible entities or states should take into consideration that NTIA will provide guidance on a variety of issues. So lots of ways that they're going to be doing this. So once NTIA approves an eligible entity's letter of intent, they will provide a list of existing resources that are currently available. States are then strongly encouraged to utilize free resources provided by NTA and other partners and are discouraged from using initial planning funds for resources that can be accessed by the state for free. So in other words, there may be companies that exist now or that spring up. It's an opportunity, right? That spring up to provide this, different kinds of training and assistance that maybe you could get for free through the NTIA. They want to make sure that states are using their funds most economically so those can, as much money as possible can go toward putting broadband in the ground or in the air, depending on if it's wireless or not. So what they're saying here is don't go paying for something that you can get for free. NTIA will have a robust technical assistance program that will eventually or continually share updated resources to eligible entities or states. Okay. So then it goes into the 5-year action plan. So that's a whole nother thing. So right now we're just talking about, again, these first two steps, which would be your letter of intent, and then requesting your initial planning funds. You need a little bit more detail on that, and you need to be thinking about, budgetary kinds of things as you request those initial funds. And as far as how to do this and assistance, some initial assistance, if you go to the NTIA site, I will link to this. Here's the portal where you can log in, and everything that you put in here, your letter of intent, your 5-year plan, your initial proposal, your final proposal, all that stuff's got to be put in online through this portal. And you can see there's one here for the BEAD, there's one here for Middle Mile, and there's one here for the State Digital Equity Planning Grant Program. And you can click on any of those as well, learn more, and then again you can click, this comes up, yeah, here it is. then you can click over here again, log in to apply now. So your letter of intent, for example, the first thing you're going to do, you could go in here, click on this, and then apply. So that's where you would do that. And again, talking about some of the free resources, here's an example. These were just announced. So these are webinars. This is on their new site, Internet for All. So they've got upcoming webinars. This one was actually today. I actually did go ahead and just watch that a little bit earlier. Kind of an overview. And then tomorrow is Internet for All webinar series, Broadband Equity, Access, and Deployment. So they're doing a webinar about BEAD tomorrow, and then they're doing one on digital equity, the digital equity program the next day, and then the next day, you can see here, this will be Friday, I guess, enabling middle mile broadband, and then so, I got several on here. Then there's the previous ones that they were doing, like the pre-NOFO ones, which at this point, I don't know if you'd really want to go back and watch those. These were pre-NOFO, before the NOFO came out. There were a lot of good questions asked, but a lot of those questions probably determined what was in the NOFO or what was covered in the NOFO. So these are upcoming webinars. Again, the next one being tomorrow at 3 o'clock, which is when I'm going to be doing Tech Tuesday. So I will not be attending this live, but I'm certainly going to try to watch the recording later. These all will be recorded as well, and you'll be able to have access to them. See if it says here where that is. Just has upcoming for now, and it has previous here. I think, for example, today's will show up under previous webinars. It does take them, I've noticed it takes them, anywhere from a few days to a week to get their previously recorded webinars up here. So if you did want to know something in a hurry tomorrow, you may want to attend this live. Otherwise, the recording will be up probably in this location. I'll link to this after the broadcast sometime in the next few days, and you can watch today's webinar, and again, you can watch any of these other ones once they're over under that previously recorded webinar link. So again, tomorrow I'm going to be doing at 3 o'clock is Tech Tuesday. It's Tuesday, so I'm going to be doing second in a series of broadcasts on TrueVision, which is our broadband diagnostics application for fiber networks as well as DOCSIS networks. It's one single pane of glass to look at fiber diagnostics. It's really meant for fiber to the home kinds of deployments where you can look on a screen and see the ONT and all of the readings coming back and forth and the bandwidth being transmitted, and if there's any issues, and you can look at the OLT and see if there's any issues with the OLT, how the lasers are doing, how the PON ports are doing. It's a really cool application. So that also will be recorded. So you can watch either one of these things live or recorded later. So thanks for joining me. And I will be back again tomorrow with Tech Tuesday right at 3 o'clock. If you want to join me for that, or again, that'll be recorded later if you're watching the other thing. And then on Wednesday, I'll be back with another broadband deployment news. I'm going to continue looking through this NOFO and the other NOFOs, like the middle mile and digital equity. And I'll just be covering little bits and pieces of that as we go, as I see something that I think will be helpful to you. So thanks again. If this was helpful, give me a thumbs up if you would. If you're not subscribed, click the subscribe button. Click the little bell and you'll be notified when I am live. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.